Coming up on this weekend's edition of Week in Review.
There were no abstentions. 182 voted against and 194 voted in favor.
We want to see the MEC specifically so that we can address the memorandum. You are aware that multiple parents have come here to report cases and none of them have ever been followed up. And we will fight for her until justice is served.
Not proved its case beyond reasonable doubt.
Why, please?
The accused are found not guilty and are discharged on all the charges.
The clock has just struck midday on this Saturday afternoon. Good afternoon. This is SABC News. We are live to you from Johannesburg. You're watching the Week in Review on SABC News. This is going to be our regular gathering point for us to pause and reflect at the summit of the week on the key and consequential developments in the news that have shaped our world during the week. Why do we do it? Because we have a country to run, a continent to build, and a world to navigate. So, let's get started. In your headlines, in a bid to quell diplomatic tensions and to tighten border security ahead of the all-important G20 summit, law enforcement agencies say they are working around the clock to address all migration-related challenges faced by South Africa and the rest of the continent. The public protector has cleared President Cyril Ramaphosa of any wrongdoing in the Donkerhoek RDP House handover during an ANC campaign. And in Betway Premiership from last night, AmaZulu FC have beaten Richards Bay 1-0 to cement their place in 7th position on the log standings. Hey, good afternoon. It's good to be in your company. I'm Tula Sizwe Simelane. Lots of ground for us to cover over the next 3 hours. But we start with this question that we are posing to you. The High Court in Gqeberha delivered a verdict that stunned the nation. The Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omotosho and his co-accused were found not guilty on 32 charges. So the question we pose to you is this: do you still trust the justice system, particularly in addressing and attending to gender-based violence cases? That is the question. You can weigh in, the details appearing on your screen, and we will take your responses thereto and reflect on it a bit later on the show. So we'll cover that story quite extensively here on the show, including a discussion in the second hour of the show where we'll be reflecting on how the judge arrived at that conclusion. In essence, saying that the reason she can't find the accused guilty is that the case was ineptly prosecuted and that there was even issues of prosecutor misconduct. So do weigh in on that question of the day. But I want to start with this afternoon. In a world where power is a delicate dance, one misstep could upset the entire balance. The Democratic Alliance's decision to reassess their role in the government of national unity has sent something of shockwaves throughout the nation. As the country grapples with the implications of this move, one question echoes through the corridors of power. What's next for South Africa? We're joined this afternoon by political analysts Professor Lisiba Tefo and Ongama Mtimka. They'll help us to delve into the complexities of the DA's decision and explore the potential consequences for the country. From the adopted budget to the future of the GNU, we examine the intricacies of this critical issue. Join us as we navigate the twists and turns of South Africa's political landscape. Before we go there, though, we get into that discussion, let's take a look at how the National Assembly voted on the 2025 fiscal framework and revenue proposal.
There were no abstentions. 182 voted against and 194 voted in favor.
It is very difficult to continue in a coalition in good faith with parties that have no good faith, let me say that. And if there was a display of bad faith, it was extreme bad faith in the middle of negotiations with the DA for the ANC to be shopping around for support by parties that are not in the GNU. And obviously by making people promises of the consequences and then trying to get the DA to define themselves out of the GNU as the president stated. We know what's been going on. We were negotiating in good faith with the ANC. They were negotiating under the carpet and around the back door with other parties and making promises to them to put together another configuration of the GNU. That's what was going down. And if that isn't bad faith, I don't know what is. But we've learnt over the years that the ANC is very rarely in good faith. And anybody who believes them is often going to be very disillusioned.
So needless to say, that's been a major talking point of the past week. Let's take a look at how that conversation unfolded on the platform X. Let's hear what some netizens had to say about it. All right, as I said, we'll unpack it all with Professor Lisiba Tefo as well as Ongama Mtimka, political analysts, joining me for that conversation now. Good afternoon, gentlemen. It's good to be with you this Saturday afternoon. Thank you for taking the time to speak to me. Let me start with you, Ongama, and I'll come to you in a moment with the same question, Professor Tefo. Just the way that it has all unfolded, it's amazing how this was a question about whether or not the national budget would pass muster in Parliament. But as we end the week, it's now a conversation about which route will the DA take. What led us to this point where the DA is now front and center in as far as focus of this issue is concerned?
Good afternoon to you and your viewers, Tulas. So in the social sciences, there's one overriding question we ask when we look at political or whatever phenomena, is what is happening here? So if I'm looking at the data, what's happening here is a big fight, not just about the budget and the numbers thereof, but about what it means to be in a coalition between a party that has got 40% and a party that's got 26%. The framework agreed upon says there should be sufficient consensus when there are differences. But if you look at the general management of differences, whether it be board committees or boards or whatever the case may be, they create a system in which if the board is divided, the chairperson has a casting vote. Now, if you look at the differences in the GNU, there are one of two ways. They can be resolved in one of two ways. Where there are disagreements that lead to a particular deadline, there should be a recognition that says we then vote on the basis of the numbers of seats. And if that happened, the ANC would have had a budget that is duly approved by the members. But I think that the bigger political issue is that the Democratic Alliance, through the mechanism of sufficient consensus, was attempting to assume a supervisory role over government. And while that makes sense from a political point of view in terms of what the agreement that they have signed, when measured against the constitutional framework in which fiscal powers are exercised, it actually is never going to work.
Professor Tefo, same question. How did the DA end up being thrust into the spotlight on this issue when, ostensibly it was a matter of, do we have a budget? Can we agree on the fiscal framework and revenue proposals and get it over the line in Parliament?
Yeah, no, good. Thank you. Always a pleasure to listen to Omga. learned perspectives as usual. Look, let it be clear that once upon a time, the ANC was the ruling party. Now it is in all governance. The game there must be understood to have changed fundamentally. They must seek at all times to work together with the partners. They don't have equal votes and equal say or influence, but make sure you take them along in national interest.
Yeah.
And they can, you cannot, there was a basic question I asked myself after the vote. There was excitement, people punching their face in the sky, and I said,
I saw that, yeah.
Yeah, who was the loser and the winner in this budget vote of 2025? Number two, right? What did they vote for? Right now, I'm listening. As you played the clip,
yes, people
were clapping hands in celebrating what? Because some of them, they can't even tell me what they were celebrating. It's just that this sense that somebody has lost and somebody has won, but they can't tell what is it that they've won or lost.
Let me try and tell you, Prof. Defo. I suppose, and this is me assuming what they were celebrating, it seemed to me that there was a sort of coalescing of parties within the GNU, outside of the DA, a lot of the other parties outside of the DA and Freedom Front Plus. It did seem that in the end, it was no longer an issue of disagreement between the ANC and the DA. It became an issue of perhaps some grievances that other political parties had. The PA's Gayton McKenzie's comments were quite telling, I would say. So I suppose that's what they were celebrating.
Yeah. And was the DA wrong in raising some of the matters? Because if it's unfortunate that once the name DA is mentioned, it's like a red flag to some people. Interrogate what they are saying. Hear them out when they speak. And people just get lost in the process. Because I had somebody already, it has collapsed. Right, it has collapsed. Today we have said it collapsed. What has collapsed? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, when the people say, right, can we cut down fat? Can we look around and about and see where we can save rather than to go the route of that? I think in the court of public opinion, which I think it will pronounce itself in the next elections going forward, I think the electorate will pronounce itself on that.
Ongama, this reading that says this was a consequential moment, almost like a crossroads moment for the DA and its participation in the government of national unity. Is that a warranted reading? Is this not one of those differences, and they've had many, many differences, where it seems to be fundamental and seems to be a red line will be crossed and therefore it might all fall apart, only for them to say, look, we don't like what has happened, but we can still find a way to proceed, particularly where they say, because we perceive the threat of a coalition with the EFF and the MK party to be more of a danger, and therefore we'll do everything to keep those parties out. Is this fundamental, or is this one of those that in a few weeks' time we'll be looking back and saying, yeah, it was huge upheaval, but here we are, it still continues?
The issues themselves are important, and as Prof says, to stand on the side of no tax increases in the public opinion serves the Democratic Alliance right. But to hear of the attempts to reverse what had been already passed in Parliament and was simply signed by the President introduces a little bit of a bad faith discussion in terms of which fiscal the process of making fiscal policy was used as a scapegoat for something else. Now, what happens here is going to be very interesting, because remember, Tulas, the DA is also negotiating internal tensions as a party, which, by the way, is seeing factional politics the same way that the ANC has witnessed. It must not escape us that the parties that helped the ANC go over the line here are Democratic political alliance splinters. And also, internally, you do not know to what extent there is coherence between those leading the negotiations and the rest of FedEx. My view is straddling somewhere between these guys that were leading negotiations were compelled to hold the hardline stance.
All right, is it
because maybe but sometimes when you hear the fact that FedEx hasn't met in a while, except for I think yesterday or the day before, then you wonder where is the pulling of strings happening when it came to leading the DA's position. But the bottom line is that what ought to happen is that this is not something that should actually break the GNU, notwithstanding the sentiment out there, because in my view, these parties need each other, not to fight ideological battles, but to see how they can collaborate in government to increase the value that South Africans are deriving from the state.
Prof. Defo, the comments of President Ramaphosa leaked from his address to the ANC caucus, and just how he was laying it down, how he says he basically told John Steenhuisen, the leader of the DA, that you've worked yourself into a corner out of which it's hard to get out now, because you made this issue to be a red line issue where you said it would render your continued participation in the government to be untenable. Were you surprised by those comments by President Ramaphosa? By all accounts, I mean, a lot of the people who are in the GNU, a lot of the parties have been saying that he tends to be the one to try and pull parties to a consensus position. But this time around, those comments didn't really fit that profile.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is what is generally known as political brinkmanship, right? I attribute that to that. For me, it is inconsequential. It means nothing. Remember, I think Omga already alluded to that. The ANC needs the DA in as much as the DA needs the ANC. Any permutation that would exclude the DA, especially at this juncture, will have severe consequences for the ANC, because they will go out as the defender of the poor. They will go out and say, well, we are ready and willing, right? Yeah. Because we cannot, for the sake of the poor, go along with that increase. In the court of public opinion, they will be damaged. But there is something. Who's pulling the strings here? That's something that we often don't want to talk about in the main. Yeah. But if you look at the media today, is that business is saying, guys, please find each other, the two of you. Yeah. Anything else would be disastrous for them. And that's my position, by the way. I've named my colors to the mast when it comes to this one. I'm unequivocal. I practice in Catholic. I must be state that outside. When I attend the Holy Mass, among other things, I pray for the good health, the GNU, and its sustainability. And whatever it takes, I will try to contribute to ensure that it happens. Don't worry about those who are in the periphery, seeking the limelight. In the few months that this has been in place, signs are there, very encouraging.
Is this, if I bring you in on this one, Ongama, is this the GNU dividend that Prof. Defo is talking about, that rightly or wrongly, I was speaking to Richard Cullen a few days ago, he was saying, rightly or wrongly, the markets, for instance, read a lot into the coherence and the continued standing of the government of national unity, and therefore we seem to be reaping a GNU dividend. Are we at a point where we can say this GNU dividend has served its purpose, it's dispensable, there'll be another dividend as long as the government, whatever iteration it takes, is a stable one?
So my issue, Tulas, is that politicians don't see that. They don't see that much of the market response that was there from when it became apparent that these parties might be presenting a budget to the National Assembly that they have not yet agreed about was more about that fact than the numbers in the budget. And this is why, in my view, that they should have a framework to sort out agreements, because markets, both domestic and international, value the coherence and staying together of the GNU more than the numbers themselves in the budget. And in fact, I've been on calls with investors and economists in South Africa that actually cite the point that, look, if you look at the budget, even the one that currently exists, there is just limitations, in terms of what can happen. And the problem is that there hasn't been transparency about the expenditure cuts that are proposed. So if it's possible to take those expenditure cuts, but notwithstanding differences about the magic beans themselves, there is a greater response or elasticity of market sentiment to political coherence and the breaking thereof than so far. So that, to me, is what the GNU dividend is. And these parties don't see it. They are so focused on settling political scores arising from governing party, opposition party, that they don't see the bigger picture. They're not strategically saying, how do we carve a path while we are in government that helps position ourselves over the long term or the medium term as a party that's ready for government? They just want to go at each other on the ideological front, and that, to me, is not the best way to hold ideological skirmishes is not the best way to handle this.
So, gentlemen, I will turn to the curious case and role of Action SA in a moment, but just to close off on the DA part, why is it, Prof. Defo, why is it that at this point the DA is now talking about we will not take hurried decisions on our continued participation in the government of national unity, when people like their spokesperson were saying, if the ANC should go and find partners outside of the GNU and pass this budget, they should try us. They should try us, as if to say, try us and you will see what the consequences will be. What's behind okay, let's be circumspect, no rushed decisions, let's not quickly, almost like let's not allow ourselves to be goaded into leaving the GNU?
They are not going to leave the GNU. Their sponsors and their financiers, incidentally, they are the same for the EFF, for the GA, for the ANC, right? They pretend otherwise. There are big boys out there who are pulling the strings, who are giving them instructions. They may not take them, but they are sensitive to what they say. Given that, when they talk about the bona fides of the ANC, negotiating mala fide, right? They talk to the DA while they are going, right? Behind the back, talk to the EFF. Remember, the EFF conceded that they talked to them to bring them board. And I wonder how many in the ANC, right, especially the elders, would be happy with that option. They would rather stick, by far the majority in the national executive, especially those who have grey matter at one level. Not the careerists, by the way. The People's Movement is infested with a lot of careerists whose interest is nothing but self-interest and not the other. Right? These are the people who would cheer even if they don't understand what it is that they are cheering or they are voting for. With due respect, the country comes second. We have had enough of this story. I would rather be heard and seen as a weak president than to let the ANC collapse on my watch. Unfortunately, it did.
Ongama?
Serve the people and not the party.
Ongama, do you want to weigh in on this before I move on to the curious case of Action SA?
I forgot the question, so you may go to that.
I was asking about, that whole phenomenon that played itself out with I think it was the Biden administration in the United States, where you say, if X happens, it would be a red line. And then X does happen, and then you don't pull the trigger. The circumspection that the DA is putting into it at this moment.
Unfortunately, I look at that from the point of view of the art of communication, Tulas, and I think you will also sympathize with this. As a former communicator, Karabo Kakao was facing a difficult situation And I think that she managed it well to send enough of a threat while at the same time unbecoming. I think that's the best she could do for a party that had not been meeting at a FedEx point of view, but its employees in the GNU were negotiating in the manner that they did. So I think she created room enough for the party to capitulate from her stance. And as a communicator, I think that's commendable under the political circumstances that she was facing.
And then let me ask you then about the curious case of Action SA. Let me start with you, Prof. Defo, and very briefly, what do you make of it all? Is it really about, as they say, there won't be a VAT increase? Yes, in the fiscal framework and revenue proposals passed, it remains on the books, but there's 30 days for National Treasury and the Finance Minister to work hard such that on the 1st of May, come the 1st of May, there's no VAT increase that comes into it. Is it about putting South Africa first, or is there what you called earlier political brinkmanship in it all?
Look, I mean, there is what one can call political naivety, again, with due respect. Because a day thereafter, the ANC issued a statement, and the Action SA complained to say, but you have not captured what we agreed on, namely that within 30 days, you'll find ways and means to make up for the deficit, and then that 0.5 will fall apart. All indications is that we are on course. It is on, right? We will have that. And I've already received something, several communications to say to me, be aware, on the 1st of May, X is kicking in. That's number one. Number two, you look at it and say, yes, by the way, if you are inexperienced when you really swim with the sharks, I mean, they will eat you for dinner, for breakfast, or lunch. Go and ask a party called AIC, African Independent Congress, and the story of Matatiele. Let me pause there.
All right, let's leave it there for this afternoon. Ongama, unfortunately, I won't have time to pose this question to you, but I do wish you well. I'm told you're not feeling so great, and I do appreciate you then taking the time and pushing through the flu there that I'm told you are suffering. That's Ongama Mtimka and Professor Lesiba Defo there. All right, lots more to come for you on this show. The Week in Review, including, we'll focus in a moment on the plight of actors in this country. This in the wake of the video that came out recently from veteran actress Mamnandi Nyembe. That conversation coming up shortly. Hey, welcome back. You're watching The Week in Review here on SABC News. Now let's go to this story. A heartbreaking plea from veteran actor Mamnandi Nyembe has sparked an outcry on social media regarding the plight faced by South African actors and entertainers. The South African entertainment industry has once again come out to support yet another struggling actor who is currently facing health and financial struggles. The 75-year-old actress, who is wheelchair-bound, recently opened up about her hardships in a heart-wrenching video shared by Masingita Masunga on social media. Well, joining us now to discuss and answer some of the questions is the chairperson of the South African Guild of Actors, Jack Devnarian. But before we get to Jack, let's welcome Mamnandi Nyembe herself, who will be speaking to us about those financial hardships and health challenges that she's facing. Good afternoon, Mamnandi, and thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. I guess the starting point is, just to appreciate the body of work that you have contributed to the arts in South Africa and the absolute respect that South Africans have for you and that legacy that you have built, that none of it can ever be erased. So it's in that context then, Mamnandi, that a lot of us saw that video and then we asked ourselves what you're going through that has led you to that point where you felt that the only way out is to make this kind of a public appeal. Just take us through all of that.
Okay. Can I?
Yes, please.
Hello? Can I speak Isintu?
Yes, please, ma'am. Go ahead. We can hear you.
Okay. Uyabona le video le yenzeke ngenye indlela nje because besingazimisela ukuthi into ezawupostwa because uma singita ufike la wangithola bengazi ukuthi ngiyagula. Wangithola ukuthi ngiyagula wathi mamnandi ngifuna ukwenza nje interview encanyana nawe. Wayenza akashongo nokuthi uzoyiposta. Mase ngithi dukuduku ngiyabona bantu bakhala bathi hey kanti mamnandi kunjani. Yona usizile uma singita because sonke isikhathi bengilokhu ngibatshela mina ukuthi angifuni ukusizelwa. Angifuni ngoba ngisebenzile yebo imali lengitholile iphelile and umsebenzi awukho but angifuni ukuthi abantu bangizwele isolo. Uyayibona leyo nto. So uma singita yena wayipost ekuposting kwakhe ngathuka ngezwe ukuthi abantu bayakhala bathi kanti mamnandi kwenzakalani naye. Ngiyagula. Arthritis ingiqedile. Ngifuna ukwenza i-operation kwi-right knee. So I'm waiting to go and do operation ku-left. And ukuyenza kwami lama operation bengasakwazi ukuhamba bengisheli ku-wheelchair. Yabona.
Yeah.
So ngisizwe ukuthi nje i-government isize ngento eyi-one ukuthi ama-senior citizens into zabo zenziwe mahala ezibhedlela.
Yes.
Because I had one doctor osebenza e-Mill Park, i-specialist samathambo.
Yeah.
Bese sikhulume naye wathi I know okay sizoyenza wathi ufuna imali yakho nibiza by 500,000. Ngase ngimtshela ngithi mina I don't think ngizokwazi ukuyibhadala leyo mali. Fortunately my doctor ubesebenza nase Charlotte Maxeke.
Yes.
So wasifonela Charlotte Maxeke wathi ngilethe patient yami lapha izokwenza i-operation. So that's how ngikwazile ukuyokwenza le operation.
So mamnandi uma ubona i-response njengoba usho ukuthi the video was not meant to be posted and made public but it ended up happening and uthi uma singita usizile in a way. Awungitshele just about the reaction and the outpouring of love and support that has come through since then.
Yo yazi angikwazi ukuvala umlomo. Bengazi mina ukuthi abantu bemzansi bangithanda kangaka. Yo bangigeza ubebeke sheni bangigeza ubebeke. And mangibona abantu abanandaba ukuthi kwenzakalani ukuthi nje basize. Yo ingithusile ngize ngiphuma ama-goosebumps.
Yeah.
Ingithusile. Abantu bemzansi bangithusile impela. Mina bengazi ngempela ukuthi kanti abantu bayangithanda bayabukela uyabona into ezinjengalezo.
Yes. Kunjalo. Lastly, yeah. Qhubeka ma.
So mina into engifuna ukubatshela yona ukuthi inkosi yami masibambane ngalendlela esibambane ngayo. Uyazi ezinye izinto akumelanga sesilinde ukuthi sithola imali endaweni ethile. Ngibheke lo baba lo okhipha imali ohambe donate imali ngamabhakethi ngebhakethi.
Yes.
Umsweli.
Yes.
Abantu baseDurban they just pour in that bucket.
Yeah.
Besiza abantu abangakwazi ukuzisiza.
Mamnandi, then a last question before I let you go from this interview. Uma, when you reflect back on your career, the amount of work that I talked about that you put in, if you were in another career, many would say you should have been able to retire comfortably, such that whatever eventualities okwenzekayo okuvelayo empilweni, provision has been made for it in your pension fund, in your provident fund, in retirement annuities, lifetime medical aid in some professions and the likes. When you reflect back on that, do you have any regrets about how the career unfolded and perhaps its contribution to your stability in your retirement years?
There are no regrets because umsebenzi engiwenzayo ngiyawuthanda ungenza ngiphile enhliziyweni. You understand? The only problem yethu ukuthi ngempela zonke lezi zinto zibalile azikho. Asisena royalties esiwatholayo. Ama-production wethu ayathengiswa, bathola imali, but bakhohlwe nabantu abayenzile lo nto leyo.
Sure.
Uyayibona leyo nto.
Yes.
So kubuhlungu, and abantu, I don't think abantu bayazi ukuthi kunzima kanjani singama-artist, because ngingathola umsebenzi manje, like njengomanje njengoba ngisenamali bengiqeda ukwenza i-adulting, ngiqeda ukwenza nento icala.
Yes.
I made money there, but mayifika imali ngingenelwe ama-problems amaningi. I had to use that money. Ngibhadale imali eningi ngabeshisiwe la Charlotte Maxeke, nakhona ngiswe ubu-desperation ngihambisa umntanami khona.
Yeah.
Kodwa ngiye ngabhadala khona manje ngisakolota imali eningi kabi laphana elentoni eThepothemba, ngikolota imali engikade ngise umntanami khona.
Yeah.
And abantu don't know ukuthi ngiyitholile lo msebenzi ngiqeda ukwenza manje. Once yaphuma imali ayikho enye engenayo, mawungekho i-job ayikho enye imali engenayo. Uyayibona?
Yeah.
Ngahlala unyaka wonke or 2 years ngingenamsebenzi.
Yeah.
Ngikhumbula ngesikhathi selento zone 14 kwavalwa sahlala 3 years singasebenzi.
Sure. Wow.
Belokhu besithembisa bethi no izongena, no nizosebenza 3 years.
Sure.
Sisaqala ukusebenza ngo-2010 ama-program akhona ebezawuboniswa for 3 years.
Yeah.
But what happened kulo msebenzi leyo siwuqede nge-1.5 year.
All right. Mamnandi, I have to leave it there for this afternoon. Thank you very much for talking to us. I really appreciate this opportunity. That's Mamnandi Nyembe there, a veteran actress, just opening up. And I guess for the benefit of those who don't speak isiZulu, in summary, she was talking about just the initial process that led to that video circulating on social media and saying that it was not intended to be distributed publicly, but in the end, the person who distributed it actually helped out in that it then brought her plight to the fore, and talking about how she's just been amazed, completely astounded and amazed by the amount of respect that South Africans have and the compassion that has been pouring out towards her. And towards the latter part of her comments, she was reflecting on the difficulties in the industry, where you do a lot of work, but sometimes because the work is intermittent, without benefits worked into the kind of work that you do. So sometimes she says you can go for a year, up to 3 years, without any work coming your way. By the time you get paid for the previous job you did, you have so many debts that you have built such that, you know, it goes straight into it. You're into that deficit. So it's that conversation that we want to delve into with Jack Devnarian, who joins me now from the South African Guild of Actors. Good afternoon, Devin. Thank you for coming through. So just listening to Mamnandi's story there, it's not the first time. It's same script playing itself over and over again, different cast, as they would say. What does it tell us about the industry and its ability to, you know, they give value, you guys give value to us in the works that you produce, the industry's ability to give value to you in your old age and retirement?
I like the fact that you use the word industry, because this is the part that people don't seem to understand. An industry is defined by the rules and the regulations that we agree to so that people understand what their rights and obligations are. Many people, and unfortunately, decision makers and policy makers in government seem to consider this to be a playground consisting of a bunch of children running around playing with toys in the sandpit. They seem not to understand that this is an industry that requires protection for creatives, that requires social security built into it, that requires worker rights, that requires collective bargaining, unionization. And this is our difficulty, because what Mamnandi is talking about applies to every single actor in this industry. And we should not be surprised, as you say, when more and more performers end up in the position that she is in. It just, it's heartbreaking to see how she's in great pain. She's so emotional, but she's holding on to her dignity. And South Africans have stepped up to help her. We care enough for our elders to help them in their time of need. But it seems we don't care enough about our elders to change the laws that govern our industry.
So where are the gaps, Jack, in terms of treating this as an industry? The country is known for its robust labor law protections in general.
Yes.
Do these extend to this industry?
They don't at all. And in fact, this is why people in our industry see this as a profound failure of our democratic dispensation since 1994, when there were the most incredible worker protections that were built in. There were amendments to existing labor laws, and many apartheid-era labor laws were repealed. But we did not see an extension of those labor laws going into the creative sector. And I believe that there was a reason for that. I very firmly believe, and there's evidence to suggest this, that broadcasters and producers make money, enjoy greater profits by exploiting the work of the creatives who are not protected under union systems. And we have incredible labor laws, as you say. But to think that as I come to work as a freelancer, the Labor Relations Act specifically excludes me from joining a union, from creating a union. And if I can't have a union, then that means I can't engage in industrial action. It means I can't create standardized contracts or benchmark rates. So this is why you have people who are fighting for industry regulation, and there are those voices that are fighting against because it serves their profits.
Why is that conversation seemingly not moving? You and I have not spoken in about, I don't know, I would, wild guess, maybe 4 years.
Yes.
But I'm pretty sure the last time you and I spoke, we were talking about exactly the same point.
Absolutely. And in fact, at the time, we were talking about how our government had failed to provide assistance during COVID, because as freelance performers, we were not allowed to make contributions to the UIF. And you had millions of workers who were able to get TERS benefits from the UIF during COVID. In the creative sector, we were not making any contributions to UIF. We couldn't claim any compensation. We couldn't claim any relief. And nothing has changed. So this is why you and I are back where we started, and it doesn't seem that there is any serious interest to change this. And I've just come out of a wonderful regional workshop with 9 other African countries under the banner of the International Labour Organization. And we learned so much. And in Africa, it seems to be that a number of our African counterparts are starting to transform their sectors and giving worker rights, union rights to their creatives, but we don't have the same.
So without personalizing it, right, to the person of the current minister, we can, though, talk about his force and energy. So he did respond to the plight of Mamnandi, and I've seen him commenting on the plight of other artists as well. But is that enough that you pin it down to the energy and goodwill of one person, or will his measure of success be beyond your own acts, where he says to Mamnandi, this is not money from government, this is money from Gayton. Your legacy as minister when you leave should be that I'm the one who moved these issues forward.
I don't quite know what to make of the minister's video for 2 reasons. One is, if I see somebody who's struggling at the side of the road and who's desperate for food, if I decide to help them, do I take a selfie in order to put that on social media to promote myself and how charitable I am? The second point is, when it comes to worker rights, that does not sit with the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. You have to look at how many different government departments have to be brought into the conversation. For example, you and I spoke, just before we went live about the Copyright Amendment Bill. Royalty rights are written into that bill, not by Arts and Culture, but by the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. If you're talking about regulating artificial intelligence, the policies are being drafted by the Department of Communications. If you're looking at worker rights, that's the Department of Employment and Labour. So until all these ministers start to talk to each other and break down these silos, then I'm afraid you and I are not going to see any progress. And there'll be many more like Mamnandi.
All right, Jack. I've got to thank you for coming through. That's Jack Davnarian there, who is from the South African Guild of Actors, just weighing in on some of those issues in the entertainment and performing arts industry. All right, stay with us. This is the Week in Review on SABC News. Hey, welcome back to this serious matter now that we've focused on this week, gender-based violence and rape of children. That continues to be a serious problem in this country. The country was rocked by protests this week in an effort to denounce and call for an end to the scourge. A call for justice has also been made for a 7-year-old minor who was allegedly sexually assaulted at her school in Matatiele in the Eastern Cape. Amidst the protest, a 58-year-old teacher appeared before the Mankweng Magistrates Court for allegedly sexually violating a 13-year-old minor multiple times at a school in Mukutupong outside Polokwane in Limpopo. The police minister, Senzo Mchunu, held a press briefing in Pretoria yesterday where he said the police are working hard to fight gender-based violence, saying that they are treating those incidents with the seriousness they deserve. General Fani Masimula, the police commissioner, saying at that press conference that 600 to 900 cases of sexual offences are registered every week, not only relating to minors, but even women in general, as well as men in this country. So let's hear now from a relative of someone we're calling anonymous to protect their identity. This is someone who's related to that victim in Limpopo. Ma'am, good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. Obviously, we're not revealing your identity to respect that aspect of things. But just tell us about how this ordeal has affected you as a family. Ma'am, can you hear me? Hello, Anonymous, can you hear me?
Hello?
Yes, please tell us how this ordeal has affected you as a family.
This thing about
yeah, no. I'm afraid that line is not great, ma'am. Let's ask that we pause and then we'll try and see if we can arrange and speak to you in a proper line. But we do have Dr. Shahida Omar, who is from the Teddy Bear Clinic Foundation, to join us and take this conversation forward. She joins me now. Dr. Omar, good afternoon. Thank you for your time once again. So we saw this briefing from the Minister of Police yesterday, in which briefing he made, Senzo Mchunu, made this comment, and I quote here, "The track record of our family violence, child protection and sexual offences unit remains commendable, with more than 35,500 GBV suspects arrested in the last 2 years." How does that stack up with the ordinary experiences of victims, particularly child victims? You recently had a statistic come out from your organization.
So thank you for sharing that information. I think if we just look at what the minister shared with the public, what we are experiencing on the ground, unfortunately, is actually contradicting the realities of access to justice for our children. Firstly, I'm glad you made reference to the research that was conducted by the Teddy Bear Foundation. Over 5,000 cases were reviewed, and of those 5,000 cases, only 15% reached finalization, meaning that they came to court. And only 4% of those cases, shockingly, 4% were convicted. So if we look at what we are hearing about law enforcement officials, yes, they are working very hard completely because they are under-resourced. They are understaffed. They do not have specialized training. They do not have sufficient vehicles. They are not trained to be sensitive in communicating with victims of child abuse and their families. And we often find that victims are then, instead of being helped, are being compromised and are subjected to secondary victimization and trauma. And because of the under-resourcing of law enforcement officials, there seems to be a breakdown in communication where victims and their families do not get updated information on the status of the case or when they have to appear in court. There are so many challenges here that we have to address because there are undue delays, even in relation to collecting DNA evidence, the backlog there.
Yes.
But often we find that when the cases are taken to the NPA, because of the lack of thorough investigation, those cases are not put onto the roll. And I think yesterday, the minister also made reference to the complexity, how complex it is with children. And I want to amplify that often there are concerns and it appears that a child is confabulating or fabricating. But we need to understand that in a traumatic state, when a child has experienced such a severe trauma, the information becomes quite fragmented. There's also dissociation from the incident, the traumatic incident. So they may give bits and pieces and give information on the peripheries and actually miss out on the core information. So Shahida, we need to address that, yes.
So Shahida, let me take advantage of you raising that exact point. Part of the point of yesterday was to update the public on the case in Matatiele of the child that was raped there, allegedly at a school. We hear from that update that no foreign DNA was detected and found upon examination of the child. How important is what you just said now about the sensitivities of dealing with child victims? How important is that for us to factor that into, how we proceed with this particular case? Because I suspect it may not necessarily mean that there was no rape that took place. It may simply mean that perhaps other factors came into play such that this evidence is just not there.
So as you rightfully have stated, that in 80 to 90% of child abuse cases, there isn't conclusive physical findings, there isn't physical evidence to corroborate. And I think that we should not preclude that abuse has not occurred. There are other mechanisms and means that one has to follow. In the absence of physical evidence, the forensic medical examination then would have to make a referral for a forensic assessment, which is conducted by a psychologist or a social worker trained in that area. And through that, to establish the veracity of the child, to ascertain whether the child is able to speak to the truth, but also ensuring that the child is not fabricating. I think the police here have not followed due diligence.
Shahida, let me ask you to pause there for a moment. I'll continue with our conversation in just a moment. That's Shahida Omar from the Teddy Bear Foundation, just weighing in on these issues that we've been focusing on around gender-based violence. More on that conversation and a lot more. This is The Week in Review on SABC News.
For over 30 years, we've been part of your community. Clientele Funeral Plans pay out cash within 24 hours, tax-free. It includes cover for grocery, transport, and unveiling benefits. You can cover yourself and extended family members on one plan. Get peace of mind with a Clientele Funeral Plan. Sikona for our communities since 1992. SMS cover to 48524 and we'll call you back. SMS now.
I have been completely outclassed this morning. My brow is sweating, my nose is sweating, my back is sweating.
Justine, being a biokineticist, knows every part of the body. If you've got strength in your core and in your midline, your center line, everything else will be strong. It's a wonderful recovery if you've been through anything.
People think it's a luxury to come here, but it's not. It's actually a necessity for life.
If you've got a strong body, you've got a stronger mind.
Coming up on this weekend's edition of Week in Review.
There were no abstentions. 182 voted against, and 194 voted in favor.
We want to see the MEC specifically so that we can address the memorandum. You are aware that multiple parents have come here to report cases and none of them have ever been followed up. And we will fight for until justice is served.
Not proved its case beyond reasonable doubt.
Why, please?
The accused are found not guilty and are discharged on all the charges.
One o'clock on this Saturday afternoon. Good afternoon. You're watching SABC News. This is the Week in Review here on SABC News. It is our weekly gathering point for us to pause and reflect at the summit of the week and reflect on the consequential issues that have dominated news headlines. Why do we do it? Because we have a country to run, a continent to build, and a world to navigate. So, let's get started. South Africans being urged to be more vigilant as the new Mpox variant is said to be highly infectious. Unlike the first variant that was said to be transmitted mainly through sexual contact, skin-to-skin contact, and sharing items like bedding and clothing, Clade 1B can be transmitted through touching, coughing, sneezing, and mucus. The power utility Eskom says it's forging ahead with replacing vandalized and stolen copper cables with aluminium cables at hotspots. Criminologists say while this move by Eskom may reduce the rate of damage to essential infrastructure, beefing up law enforcement, using technology and community involvement can help win the fight against cable theft. And a Russian strike has killed at least 18 people, including 9 children in Kiev. President Volodymyr Zelensky, that's his hometown, but Russia's defense ministry saying it had targeted a military gathering in that town. The strike was one of Moscow's deadliest this year in the conflict launched with the Kremlin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Hey, good afternoon. It's good to be in your company. Lots of ground to cover in this hour as well. We'll be focusing quite a bit on the cases that have been playing themselves out in the courts, but also going back to complete our conversation about gender-based violence and sexual offenses. So let me tell you what the question is for this afternoon, and we ask you to weigh in on it. The High Court in Gqeberha delivering a verdict that stunned the nation. The Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omotosho and his co-accused found not guilty on 32 charges. So the question to you is, do you still trust the justice system, particularly in addressing and attending to gender-based violence and sexual offense cases? You can weigh in. The details appear on your screen at the moment. Yeah, it's an important conversation, and we do want you to weigh in because who knows, right? Who knows who may be watching and will be able to take in what you have to say in terms of the decision making going forward. But I want to go back to a conversation we tried to align for you a bit earlier on, but had difficulties with the line. This is a family member of the victim in Limpopo, the child victim, a 13-year-old child there. We're not revealing the identity naturally because that has to be respected, but let's try and see if we've got, we're calling her anonymous. Good afternoon. I'm hoping you can hear me better this time around. I was asking you to just take us through, your family must be having quite the difficulty in navigating this situation. Just share with us the weight and the impact of this incident on you as a family and on the child as well.
Can I speak with Betty? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, can I speak with my home language?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Jalo ka family. Taba ya ya go tshwara gape. re lebeletse education ya ngwana re tsaya ngwana re buisa sekolong re botsa gore o ya motswadi o ya go batswadi mo ile re tsang ke a fumane go ka moka le lerato tse di feleletseng ga re tlo ka taba e a ya re tshwara ga botiki re lebeletse le education ya ngwana ka tsaba free go ya pele re tsile go botse ba se le rato le bana le bona se sekolo nna and ye nngwe ba sa se free ya go bolela le ri ya go raloka le bana ba bana ka mo ntle o mona go bitsana so now after gore motho la ba motsari bona mo ile go tsena go ba free nyana go na go raloka le le a re ke se se be ka mo teng ya gare.
So what has happened by way of investigation, ma'am, in terms of you laying a charge? Is it being investigated? What are police telling you? Okay. All right. I think let's leave it there. We do, I think we get the gist of what you were saying, but obviously the line really not the best of lines that we have there. And hopefully, you know, in the coming days, we can actually get some reporting going on that. We have a capable team in Limpopo there, at SABC News team that can take that story forward. But let's continue the conversation with Shahida Omar. Shahida, thank you for staying on. So we were talking earlier on about the statistics and how they stack up with the reality faced by victims, as well as the weaknesses that you were identifying in the criminal justice system. Let me ask you, Shahida, how are you and I still having this conversation when we had a whole gender-based violence and femicide summit, and it was led by the president, and it was multi-sectoral and came out with a national strategic plan 2020 to 2030 with the first half of 6 pillars. Pillar number 3 was meant to deal exactly with these issues of strengthening the criminal justice system. But in 2025, we sit with a case, for instance, in Gqeberha there, where we are told that it was so ineptly prosecuted such that out of 32 charges, from 63 to 32 to an entire acquittal on all charges. How is that possible?
So you are absolutely correct. The National Strategic Plan made provision for these very challenging situations and circumstances. Unfortunately, if we look at the ERAP, the Emergency Response Action Plan, it spoke specifically to employing personnel, adding resources to the different government departments. And if we actually look at that, that has not changed. The National Strategic Plan and the 6 pillars are excellent. They're exemplary of the work that needs to be delivered, implemented on the ground. But we also need to look at the coordination and the collaboration of the different government departments. We still continue to work in silos. Even the pieces of legislation are not synergized. There isn't synchronicity. And I think that is where the challenges lie. There's a breakdown in communication, but most importantly also to understand that under-resourced government departments, we are expecting law enforcement officers to create miracles when they don't have the basic resources, in the personnel, vehicles, and everything else that goes with it, unfortunately makes their task impossible. They're overloaded, the volumes they have to deal with, the lack of specialized skills, where they actually are not in a position or equipped on how to respond or relate to victims and their families. So what do we actually see? We find inappropriate, inadequate, and lack of timeous responses to these crisis cases. And therefore, this is a repetition. We find that the music changes. We go from province to province, community to community, but the lyrics remain the same. The same kind of responses are elicited, which results in secondary victimization, secondary trauma to the victim and to the victim's families.
All right, I've got to thank you for your time and your insights. That's Shahida Omar there from the Teddy Bear Foundation, just weighing in on those conversations. And I'm interested in what Shahida is saying about the dedication of a lot of the people. You know, you do see cases of failure naturally, but the dedication, a lot of those professionals are quite dedicated, but let down, I suppose, by what Shahida is talking to there. You're watching The Week in Review here on SABC News. I'm back with more for you in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching The Week in Review here on SABC News. The Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mamoloko Kubayi, has requested a comprehensive report from the National Director of Public Prosecutions on the damning assessment of the prosecution's conduct and competence made by the Eastern Cape Judge Irma Skuman in the Timothy Omotosho case. Omotosho and his co-accused Lusanda Sulani and Zuki Swasito were acquitted on all the charges by the High Court in Gqeberha this week on Wednesday. They were facing rape, human trafficking and racketeering charges. Kubayi has expressed concern about the manner the case was handled by the prosecuting team, as Judge Skuman, in her judgment, lambasted the prosecution for unethical conduct and incompetence. For more on this, I'm joined now by the research specialist on gender-based violence, Lisa Vetten, Justice and Constitutional Development Portfolio Committee member, Oscar Matafa, as well as criminal lawyer, Advocate Lufuno Nevondwe. Good afternoon to all of you. I've got to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me on this Saturday afternoon. Let me start with you, Mr. Nevondwe, and ask you about the what you heard there about the conduct of the prosecution, particularly around issues that, you know, I imagine should be par for the cause and just a daily staple in how you conduct a criminal trial. The issue of cross-examination seems to have been where the case stood and fell. What did you make of what you heard about the adequacy or otherwise of the cross-examination by the prosecutors there?
Yeah, thank you. I think the issue there lies at a failed cross-examination. Remember, cross-examination is the greatest engine to discover the truth. So at cross-examination, that is where you prove that you prove your case. Remember, in a criminal trial, each case must be proven beyond reasonable doubt. The moment there is a doubt, then you give the benefit of the doubt to the accused persons. So in this case, the prosecution has failed the victims. They didn't do sufficient cross-examination. In fact, their cross-examination was very much sketchy and poor, and it resulted in the outcome of the decision. So this is very bad for the justice system, because all of us, we were waiting for justice to be done here in this case, but justice was not done because it was there was technicality in terms of how the NPA has conducted themselves in prosecuting this matter, which has then led to the acquittal of Umtoso and the other two accused, which is very, very, very disappointing to the nation.
Let me stick with you then, Mr. Nevondwe, for a moment and ask you a layperson's question, right? I've heard a lot of people asking this very basic question that says, 32 charges, surely it should have been possible to lay out evidence to at least have a guilty verdict on at least one of them in as layman language as you possibly can master. What is this concept of, needing to prove beyond reasonable doubt, or needing to prove that the accused's version, so Omotosho and the two co-accused in this case, that the version they were presenting about these events cannot, quote, reasonably possibly be true? What does that all of mean? The ordinary person doesn't really understand. You lawyers use these words. What does it all mean?
No, it simply means that when you present your case as the prosecution team, there must be no doubt in the evidence which you are presenting. The moment there is because the burden of proof lies with the state. The state must prove, when we say that the state must prove its case beyond reasonable doubt, we are saying there must not be any doubt on the evidence which has been given. The moment there is a doubt on the evidence given, then the benefit of the doubt goes to the accused. So here in this case, the state was supposed to present their case. Remember, they had a case here. They had a case, they had witnesses. So they were supposed to have led the witness properly, prove their case to court, but they failed to do that because even at cross-examination, they didn't present any evidence, which means that all the evidence which were given by the accused persons were admitted as the court as the only evidence, because there were no evidence challenging that evidence. Remember, in a cross-examination, you are able to present your evidence to challenge the accused. So they were not challenged. So whatever they've presented to court, they were accepted by court as their only evidence, which the court has relied upon to arrive at a decision of acquittal.
Yeah.
So here we are saying in a civil matter, the case must be proven on a balance of probabilities. So here in a criminal trial, there's no balance.
Yeah.
The moment there's a doubt, you give it to the accused.
All right. I'll come back to you a bit later on. There's still a bit more that I want to pull at. Mr. Matafa, I'll come you in a moment. But I want to bring in Lisa Vetten, because Lisa, you and I talked a few days ago, and you were making the point that this fits in within what you've been observing about the performance of the National Prosecuting Authority. Lay out those figures and statistics and how this, what we saw in the Omotosho case, fits in with the broader picture of the NPA's performance on these matters.
Sure. And I think it's important just to repeat the distinction you made at the outset, the difference between ethical conduct and incompetent conduct. Because the question of the ethics, I think, goes to whether or not there was persuasion to witnesses to perjure themselves. I can't say how common that is. But these questions of competence, around not even knowing what the definition of rape was, is serious. And I think if we look at the NPA's performance over the last decade, you can see, very worryingly, that they're putting down almost 3,000 rape cases fewer in the last financial year than they were doing in 2013-14. And then obviously, if you're putting down a smaller number of rape cases for trial, you're obviously getting a lower rate of conviction. Now, the NPA, to some extent, has been disguising that, because they only calculate the conviction rate against the number of cases they put down for trial. So if you listen to them, they'll tell you, we are getting a more than 70% conviction rate in rape. But the price of that is that fewer and fewer rape survivors are even getting in through the door. So what that's suggesting is that this target that the prosecution has, to achieve a certain percentage of convictions, if they want merit awards or, to stay looking like they're competent, they do. It is going to, not everyone's going to do it, but it is going to encourage people to cherry pick and select what they think are going to be the stronger cases. And that's going to have the effect of pushing all these other cases out of the system.
Yeah.
So that's the symptom that we need to look at. This case is the flagrant example, but I think we need to look at the system more closely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's easier to pass when the pass rate is much lower, right? If you're taking the cases that you enroll and take to trial versus the cases that were initially reported that were being investigated, which would then change that dynamic altogether. Let me bring in Oscar Matafa, a member of the Justice and Constitutional Development Portfolio Committee. So listening to this conversation, Mr. Matafa, and also taking in what the judge had to say, you provide oversight of over the Department of Justice and Correctional Service, Constitutional Development. I'm sorry for that. You provide oversight over that and its entities, and the NPA being, while independent in terms of the prosecutorial policy and how they carry out their business, but it's an entity that reports to that department. So from what was said by the judge, the way that case was handled, how emblematic is it in your experience of exercising oversight? How emblematic is it of the difficulties and failures that are letting down victims?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Greetings to yourself and panelists, as well as viewers from home. It is very emblematic, and the outrage in society is understandable. As a committee, we are equally outraged. Advocate Nevonda did indicate that cross-examination is an engine in the trial process. It is one of the contributing factors. The judge indicated why she had arrived at the acquittal of the accused. However, let me link it to what Lisa Ved is saying. She is speaking about ethical conduct and incompetence. Now, some of the remarks by the judge speaks to unethical behavior by one of the prosecuting team members. What is worrying to the committee is that even when of these junior prosecutors reported this unethical behavior, management in the NPA failed to act against this particular unethical behavior. They still recorded Mr. Twani, I think it's his surname, as the lead prosecutor to continue even when they have this cloud hanging over their head. So failure by management to intervene at that stage led to where we ended up, where the judge describes the cross-examination as shallow and lacking in intent to uncover the truth. As my last point, to Sizwe, if you look at the case, an 8-year-long case, dropped from 63 charges to 32 plus minus, the court sets 9 full days to interrogate the accused's testimony. The prosecution takes only 1 morning session. Now, if you compare this with the case of Oscar Pistorius, where the cross-examination lasted for 5 consecutive days, you could see there was intent to uncover the truth. And we know it ended up in conviction. So there was no commitment. And as a portfolio committee, we demanded answers. Hence, we are in full support of the minister asking for the report for a full detail of what happened in this case.
So, Mr. Matafa, let me ask you how much oversight you are able to exercise over the implementation of agreed to policies and programs. Because I suspect a lot of people will be saying, we are simply fed up. This happens every now and then, whenever there's an incident, a shocking incident of rape. Right now we're dealing with this case of the child in Matatiele, and we are all outraged and are out there calling for accountability and action. And it's sort of like, almost like we get pacified every few months. So this is my long way of asking you, the National Strategic Plan talked about improving this justice system processes. That was pillar number 3 of the 6 pillars of the first 5 years. How much oversight have you as parliamentarians exercised in ensuring that you can't just commit and go away? You commit and then we need to see it in action in the form of the right prosecutors at every level of prosecution, prosecuting the right kind of case competently?
No, thank you for that question. In your initial introduction, you did indicate that we play oversight over the ministry. And the NPA is a program within the particular ministry. Both report to Parliament. Now, if you look at Section 55 and 56 of the Constitution, read together with the privileges, powers, and immunities of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act, it gives Parliament the right to play oversight through its committees, which range from investigating, summoning anyone or any entity to come and make presentations. And then committees make recommendations. In follow-up of the National Strategic Plan, we had called the NPA to come and appear before the committee, which was in October of 2024, just last year. And we raised the lack of conviction on sexual offences cases. We lamented on the vacancy rate of senior management position, some of them also in the public prosecutions in various provinces. So our view is that this report that will come from the NPA to the minister will give us more ammunition to continue to play oversight, to see if whether the commitments made by the NPA, they are really living up to it. I'll give an example of the commitment of government to the strategic plan. We overhauled the legal framework and amended the Criminal Law, Sexual Offences and Related Matters Act 13 of 2021. However, it means nothing to Sizwe if those that are charged with the implementation of these particular interventions do not have the capacity or ability to do it. As we saw, that there was deficiency by one of the prosecutors to define or to arrive at a clear definition of what rape is.
Yeah.
So amongst others, we would want to see what the NPA is doing to capacitate its prosecutorial team, and then we'll make necessary recommendations as to what should happen either to the entity or to the ministry.
Lisa, let me turn to you. The National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batoyi, making the point that we should not all rush to judgment. We should have level and calm heads to allow an investigation that she says she's now asked to be furnished with the full record and a full report from the Eastern Cape chapter of the NPA before coming to a conclusion about some of the comments that were made by the judge. Is that good enough for you to say, pause, calm, level heads, allow investigation? There was already an investigation against the former lead prosecutor. In any case, this is the second leg of it that says, to what extent is what the judge has said true? Does that pass muster for you?
I think that's fair, because if you want to solve a problem, you need to have an accurate, deep and satisfactory diagnosis of what the issues are. And so you do need to apply your mind and give some thought to it rather than just have a knee-jerk reaction. And as I've been emphasizing since the outset, I don't think they should be looking at this particular case only. I think this case should be a springboard to look at why the system is not working generally better. And I think that the prosecuting authority, and I would actually urge the Portfolio Committee to think about this as well, is that they should remove that conviction rate target. It's not applied in any other country because it's recognized as a perverse incentive. The measure of justice is the number of cases that you put down for trial. It would be something very peculiar if you had 100% conviction rate. So they should rather remove that and emphasize and look at increasing the number of victims who are getting the opportunity to stand up in court and tell their story. That should be incredibly important. I think the other thing, and I mean, to me, it's very interesting, this case has happened in the week where we've had all the arguments about the budget. The prosecuting authority has had posts frozen since about 2015. There have been these senior posts that have been frozen. We are in austerity right now. That means that it's going to be hard to fix a system when you do not have enough prosecutors to be able to do an adequate job. What I think we are seeing is too few prosecutors for too many cases, spreading themselves too thinly and inevitably doing a poor job. Or the other scenario that I painted, where they decide, okay, this is where I'm going to do best on, this is where I'm going to focus my attention, others will just have to fall by the wayside. And then obviously budgets also have a knock-on effect in terms of the amount of training you can do. And if you are asking government officials to retire early and you have a freeze on their post, what kind of experience are you leaving for people to draw from to get the necessary training and support? So I think there's got to be some serious attention paid to the systems as well.
Mr. Navondwa, let me bring you back into this conversation. So the Eastern Cape chapter of the National Prosecuting Authority, talking about studying the judgment. This was before the judgment had been received. It's now out in terms of it being out in its written form. I've had the opportunity to read it. When you read it, do you see anything there? And please explain to our viewers as well how these things work in terms of the prosecution being able to appeal. Because I get the sense that a lot of people are saying, the NPA must appeal this. It's not that simple, is it? They are limited in terms of what they can and cannot appeal on.
Yes, they are limited. Remember, they missed the opportunity when they were given an opportunity to do cross-examination. Because cross-examination ensures a right of the victims to have a fair trial. It also seeks out the truth, and it also determines the accuracy of the evidence given and tests the credibility of the witnesses and also challenges the reliability. So they've missed that opportunity, but nevertheless, they have the right to review this judgment or appeal it, provided that maybe they might have new evidence. We will never know. So they still have that chance to review. And we believe that when they review, they will be able to do what they didn't do initially. Because remember, these are victims of gender-based violence, which is a serious challenge this country is facing. And you believe that they need to be protected by the law. Remember, the law is there to protect those who are vulnerable in a society.
Yeah.
So they are not there to punish them. They are there to protect them. So I believe that they still have a chance to review the judgment. And we believe that this time around, they will be able to correct whatever went wrong in the trial itself,
Right.
in the High Court. Yes.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you for joining me this morning. That is Advocate Lufuno Navondwe, but we were also joined by Lisa Vetten, who is a research specialist on gender-based violence, as well as the member of the Justice and Constitutional Development Portfolio Committee, that is Oscar Matafa. You're watching The Week in Review here on SABC News. In a moment, we turn to another court case that has been playing itself out, the Jocelyn Smith case that has been playing itself out in the Western Cape. Stay tuned for that. Hey, welcome back. You're watching The Week in Review here on SABC News. It's our opportunity to pause and reflect and find meaning in some of the consequential news developments of the week. Let's turn to this now. It's just over a year now since 6-year-old Jocelyn Smith went missing, and the case has only grown more complex. Different witnesses have given different accounts as to what actually happened to the little girl. Two of the accused claim they were tortured into confessing, allegations that police strongly deny. For more now, I'm joined, for now it remains a mystery as to where Jocelyn is, and to talk to us more about that, I'm joined by Melusi Xulu, who is from Donda Attorneys. Good afternoon to you, Melusi, and thank you for your time. So initially there was the testimony that we were hearing from other witnesses a few weeks ago into last week, but this past week, the focus was on confessions and admissions made by the co-accused in the matter, who are now seeking to have them not admitted on the basis that they are saying that they were tortured into making those admissions and confessions. What did you make of that argument that they are tortured? How common is it for it to be made by people who make a confession and then turn around and say, I was tortured?
Good afternoon, Mr. Smelan, and to the viewers at home. I think for high-profile cases, this is the second case in a year that we've had. There are issues of a confession that was made under duress, as stated by the accused. If you remember, in the Mayowa case that was done last year. So it's something that is common, that sometimes the accused will say, yes, I did make a confession, but when I made a confession, I was assaulted, and based on the fact that I was fearing for my life, I then made a confession and I pleaded guilty to the crime. So it does happen, but the issue is, was it made under duress? That's what now they have to prove when they do a trial in a trial.
So how does the court go about establishing that, whether or not there's veracity in the claims of the confession not being made by someone, in their own free will, and of a sober, in their sober judgments and the likes? How does the court go about determining that?
Okay. First of all, you will have the start of the trial. During the trial, the start of the trial, the defense will make a plea explanation, and they'll say during the trial they will want to have a trial within a trial because they are disputing the confessions. Then the trial will start like it started. We had the Section 204 witness testifying, and the policeman also testified. Then it stopped because they needed to deal now with the confession statements. Then now they have a trial within a trial. Then what needs to happen is, if they succeed in disputing the confessions and the court believes that the confessions are inadmissible for evidence, then the trial within the trial is finished. They will proceed, but those confession statements will not be used as evidence. But if they don't succeed, those confession statements will be used as evidence, such as we've seen in the example that I made of the Mayowa case for accused number 1 and 2 in that case.
So in this particular instance, under the spotlight, in the Jocelyn Smith case have been the two senior police officers, Captain Lombard and Brigadier Harams. The one aspect that I picked up as far as Brigadier Harams is concerned was about pressure, where there was a suggestion by the defense that says you were under pressure from the media, from politicians such as Gayton Mackenzie and others. You wanted to please and satisfy that quest for justice. When you were watching it and watching that element of them testifying, what did you make of their consistency and whether or not they were able to stand and back up the manner in which they carried out their work, including obtaining those confessions?
Well, I think what is important, as much as we have what we call trial by media or trial by social media, if you will, or by political pressure and the society's demands that the people who are suspects must be tried. What is important in these aspects of the confession, Mr. Smelane, is that even the medical practitioners or the doctors, they'll be able to do an examination before the confession and then make an examination post the confession. And what we've seen, I believe yesterday, there was a testimony by the second medical practitioner that accused number 2 was not assaulted before or after. There was no injuries that were visible.
Yes.
So that is consistent with what the police might be saying. We never assaulted them. And if a medical practitioner comes and says, they never said they were assaulted when I checked them, then, you know, it gives more credibility to the police. Not that I'm saying they were not assaulted, but
yes.
It's just consistent with what the police officers are saying.
Yeah. It must be important for us to restate that this is not us determining factually what happened, but it's observations that are coming through from the trial itself. Talk to me a bit more about the medical evidence. You rightly point out that the medical officer that testified actually said, I specifically asked, were you assaulted? And I got an answer that said, no, I wasn't. This has to do with that form called the J88, does it?
Yes. So to the viewer, the J88 is a form that the doctor fills in and it's put in the docket. Sometimes when you open a case for assault, they fill in a J88 and they'll say where you were assaulted. So in this case, because they were doing confessions, they needed to make sure that before they made a confession, there was no visible injuries, and after that, there were also no visible injuries. Remember, I believe with accused number 2, there was an injury that he had years before, or something to that effect. So it was not something that could be said it's because he was assaulted in this case. So the medical reports were important to establish that they were not coerced physically, so to speak.
And Melusi, in this case, I mean, it must not be lost on us that at the heart of it is this missing 6-year-old child, right? And has been missing for a year now. And I don't know what you make of the actual physical evidence, the presence or absence of that, vis-a-vis the value of corroborative witness, evidence, witnesses coming forward and corroborating various versions that are being advanced in this case. So overall, what's your sense of the evidence and how difficult or easy it will be for the prosecution to prove its case?
Well, the first thing I think we must look at is what test is to be used in this case. As we know, in a criminal case, you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt. So yes, there are cases where if it's a murder case, then the deceased or the body of the deceased is missing. Sometimes, the accused will still be convicted, but it's very rare and it's very difficult to do. So I think what the state is relying on more than anything is the Section 204 witness, which is Ms. Lombard, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe that is what they'll try to use, or they'll try to use some circumstantial evidence, but there's no physical evidence that will assist. Because, for example, Ms. Melane, if that Sangoma that bought Jocelyn was also arrested, and maybe Jocelyn's body was found somewhere, it might have been easy for the state to have a stronger case. Not that I'm saying it's not a strong case, but I'm saying it would have been much stronger. And we know how high-profile cases go sometimes when there's pressure, and then at the end of the day, there's an acquittal, as it happened this week in another high-profile case. So I see there's some pressure from the state to get some results, but let's hope that, they will do everything right so that, there's justice for the victim. But let us remember as well that when you talk of justice, we also talk about justice for the accused as well, where they mustn't be found guilty of something where there's no strong evidence. That's what I want to say.
Yeah, I've got you. Thank you for that. Thank you for your time and your insights this afternoon. That's Melo Sikulu. He's from Donda Attorneys, weighing in on that case going on in the Western Cape around the disappearance of Jocelyn Smith. In the next few minutes, we take you to another courtroom, this time in Polokwane. We'll be focusing on the battle for the Venda kingship. That conversation coming up in a moment. Hey, welcome back. This is the Weekend Review on SABC News. It's good to be with you on this Saturday afternoon. To this matter now, the former Venda king, Tonimpepu Ramabulana, made an appearance this week at the High Court in Polokwane to testify on the ongoing kingship battle brought to court by his niece, Princess Masindi Ramabulana. This ongoing battle has seen former President Jacob Zuma's decision to declare Tony as king being declared unlawful and invalid by the Supreme Court of Appeal in 2019. In his testimony, Ramabulana said Masindi cannot ascend the throne as a woman, as that could defile the culture if she were to get married, for example. Well, joining us are two guests, and the first one is Dr. Ntambeleni Nechitsaulu, a culture and customary law commentator. He is from the University of Venda. Let's see if we can start with him. And then in a moment, we'll talk to Bond Nyoka, an attorney and legal analyst. But Dr. Nechitsaulu, let me see if I have you and can speak to you. So a lot that we were observing over the week. And I think for me, at the heart of the debates and questions that were being asked of Tonimpepu Ramabulana was the question of him being a Ndumi, initially, and how that led to him being king. Let's start with that aspect before we turn to the other aspects that were at play, such as the gender of Princess Masindi. Let's start with this question of a Ndumi. How central is it to this case whether a Ndumi, which is an aid, the way I understand it, an aid to the king, ending up being king himself? Dr. Ramabulana? Dr. Nechitsaulu? No, we do seem to have a bit of a challenge with that line. So don't worry about it. We'll try and dial him back. But in the meantime, let me bring in Bond Nyoka, an attorney and legal analyst, also a good friend of mine, to just take us through this conversation. Bond, good afternoon. Thank you for your time. So tell me about what this case brings to the fore, the issues around whether or not a woman can ascend the throne. What is the law on that as far as we understand it at the moment?
Thank you for inviting me. The values of the New South Africa are enshrined in our Constitution in Section 1. Section 1 has got about 8 values, 3 of which are applicable in this matter. The first one being the right to human dignity of every person. The second one is freedom, and the third one is achievement of equality. The achievement of equality value is also stated and expanded upon in Section 9, subsection 2 of the Constitution, which says that due to the history of division on racial basis, we are pursuing equality in South Africa. It's stated as achievement of equality. The act of achieving is not an event, it's a process. And it says that although everyone is equal before the law and enjoys equal protection and benefit of the law, there will be fair discrimination where historically a people or category of peoples were discriminated against on the basis of race, sex, gender, etc. What is applicable here is past discrimination unfairly on the basis of gender and sex. The Constitutional Court has affirmed this on 2 occasions. In the case of Bear, where it was held that a woman can succeed where there is no will in place of a man. And also in Shibulani, it was stated that in terms of Section 211 of the Constitution, the traditional ceremony, the traditional authorities can develop customary law in accordance with the constitutional norms. We have to bear in mind that we're a constitutional democracy which places the Constitution as supreme law of the land. And Section 2 says that any law or conduct that is in violation of the Constitution is invalid. So customary law has to be in harmony with the supreme law of the land, being the Constitution. It is not being said that customary law is being violated, but the idea of supremacy of the male, I'm not going to say primogeniture.
Yeah.
It's difficult, that word. The supremacy of the male is a thing of a distant past because it is against the value of equality.
Yeah.
So our body of law, as far as this is concerned, is in harmony with what we want to be constitutional. Britain did not have a female queen until Queen Elizabeth came, and the cables did not come tumbling down. So really our jurisprudence or body of law is in pursuit, is following our Constitution. It is said that traditional authorities are recognized through the House of Traditional Leaders.
Yeah.
They must develop the custom, but that custom is subject to the law and the Constitution. So everything and everyone is subject to the Constitution.
The supremacy of the Constitution. Let me pause you there for a moment, Bond. Let me bring in some of the reflections that we are seeing on X, for example, around this conversation. So let's bring up 1 or 2, and I believe we do have Dr. Netshisaulu as well to weigh in on this. Have a look. Yeah, so those are some of the reflections that we are seeing on social media. So the conversation quite alive there as well. Let me see if I have Dr. Ntambeleni Netshisaulu to weigh in. Doc, good afternoon if you can hear me. So we've been learning quite a bit about Venda culture and customs around succession in as far as kingship is concerned. I do believe that we'll be able to just continue with the conversation in the next few minutes, but very briefly, start with the centrality of the question of Ndumi. Tell us what Ndumi is and why the concept of Ndumi has been so central in how this case is being played out in the High Court in Polokwane.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can now. Please go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you very much for the question. You know, Ndumi in Venda, we said, Urumandeve, somebody who advises the king or the chief. So there is no way in which the Ndumi can become a chief or can replace the king or the chief. Because if that is the case, no chief is going to live for a long time, because he will be making a means of getting the position if ever he has that opportunity.
Yeah.
What the task that the Ndumi is supposed to do is to advise the chief.
Dr. Netshisaulu, I'm terribly sorry to do this. Let me do this. I do need to refresh very, very quickly. Stay on the line. Don't go anywhere. We will continue with the conversation in just a moment. That's Dr. Ntambeleni Netshisaulu, a customary law and cultural commentator out of the University of Venda. Don't go anywhere. We'll continue with the conversation in a moment. Just after 2 p.m. on this Saturday afternoon, live from Johannesburg, this is the SABC News channel. You're watching Week in Review here on SABC News. News developments hit you at breakneck speed every day, and your world is changing every day. When do you find the time to reflect on it all? That's the reason we are here. This is the Weekend Review, our regular gathering point where we pause and reflect and make meaning of the key developments of the week. So, let's get straight to it then. Audio streaming giant Spotify's royalty payments to artists from Nigeria and South Africa spiked to $59 million last year as performers rode a wave of growing interest in music from the continent. The Swedish company paid out some $10 billion in royalties worldwide in 2024. US President Donald Trump's 10% baseline tariff has officially taken effect on all imports to the United States. The measure applies to goods from virtually every country and from electronics to clothing. And Manchester City manager Pep Guardiola hailed Kevin De Bruyne as one of the Premier League's greatest midfielders after the Belgian announced on Friday that he will leave City at the end of the season, completing a decade at the club. Hey, good afternoon. It's good to have you this afternoon here on SABC News. We have a question that we're asking you because we want you to be part of the conversation this afternoon. The High Court in Gqeberha delivering a verdict that stunned the nation. Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omotosho and his co-accused found not guilty on 32 charges. So the question we are asking you this afternoon, do you still trust the justice system, particularly in addressing and attending to issues of gender-based violence and sexual offenses as well? So do weigh in on that conversation. The details on your screen at the moment. All right, we want to continue and just wrap up the conversation we were having at the end of the last hour. I'm in conversation with Dr. Ntambeleni Nechitsaulu, as well as Bond Nyoka, an attorney and legal analyst who joined me to take that conversation. What conversation is that, in case you're just joining us? It is about the former Venda king, Tonimpepu Ramabulana, making an appearance at the High Court in Polokwane to testify in the ongoing kingship battle that has been brought to court by his niece, Princess Masindi Ramabulana. This ongoing battle has seen former President Jacob Zuma's decision to declare Tony as the king being declared unlawful and invalid, and that happened in the Supreme Court of Appeal in 2019. In his testimony, Ramabulana said Masindi cannot ascend the throne as a woman because that could defile the culture if she were, for example, to get married. So let's continue the conversation then. Dr. Ntambeleni Nechitsaulu, let me stick with you for a moment. I was asking, and you were explaining the issues around the Ndumi and how that fits in with this conversation. The reason we ask this question, Dr. Nechitsaulu, is that it is said that Tonimpepu was the Ndumi of the late king. And that's central to the argument, isn't it? The argument that says he should not have ascended to the throne, because in your explanation a few minutes ago, you are saying that this is an aide and an advisor to the king.
Yeah, definitely. I want to start off from that point. Once you become an advisor of the chief or of the king, whether the king dies or whatever happens, nobody, the Ndumi is not supposed to succeed the chief, because if ever he is given or is given that opportunity, no chief is going to live a long time, because everybody wants to become a leader. So in this case, I think it's a shame to Venda, because we should have resolved this problem long time ago. But unfortunately, this chieftainship that is in the Ramabulana family, I think the problem is they know nothing about our customary law or our customary, because they should have decided to get somebody who can replace Tony. Because remember, when Tony was a Ndumi, and the aunt of his father replaced his father as somebody who wants to take over. But unfortunately, Tony and the other group said, no, you cannot. It's our time now. Thinking that Tony is going to become the king or the chief, which is wrong according to our culture. And remember, if you remember the scandal of VBS, Tony paid 18 million to Jacob Zuma in order to get the position. So nobody's supposed to be surprised.
All right. I've got to pause you there, Dr. Nechitsaulu, and ask that we be cautious and be accurate in terms of what the reports were. The way I recall it, and I may be wrong, was that former President Jacob Zuma obtained a loan from VBS, right? And it wasn't, as far as I recall, it was never reported that he received that 18 million rand from Tony Mpepu, who was king at that particular point. But nevertheless, that's something that can be checked factually, and I don't think it's germane to the conversation that you and I are having. Tell me a bit more, Dr. Nechitsaulu, about the argument that has been advanced in that cross-examination of Tony Mpepu, that Princess Masindi cannot ascend simply because she's a woman. And I ask you this question in the context of customary law on succession having been developed in a long line of authority in this country to the effect that it should fit in with the Constitution. How difficult a conversation does that make for Venda in this country?
Yeah, unfortunately, everything is politicized now. She qualifies to be, if ever it was a relevant family, she would qualify to become a queen. But unfortunately, she doesn't qualify because there is no kingship or queenship in the Ramabulana family. That is exactly what it is, whether we want to dodge it or we want to support it. But that is the case. Above all, she may not qualify because of her family, where she's coming from.
Yeah, so you're opening a can of worms here, Dr. Nechitsaulu. Let me allow you to say a bit more about that, because you and I tested this out with you before coming to air and was asking you about this. You are simply saying, the way I understand you, and you can explain to our viewers, you are saying the two people at the heart of this Mubango style of dispute playing itself out in the courts, you are saying neither of them is suitably qualified to be king because of the family from which they come. Explain, what do you mean by that?
Remember, when these people came from Mambo, they got to Angona here in Venda, and they usurped through marriage. They usurped this kingship and chieftainship by marrying from the very same family of the kingship. So they don't qualify. We are very much surprised by our government, which says when the democratic government takes over the government, they are going to reverse and redress the injustices that was made by the colonial and apartheid government. Remember, the former life president Mpepu became a captain at some times, and if you look at that position, it doesn't exist in our customary. But the politicians are the ones who are politicizing our culture into politics, and they choose whosoever they have a favor to, which is wrong. These things is not done by the vendor themselves. Remember, we had a commission where Professor Muleleki announced that this kingship belongs to Shiria Denga Chijuere and the power. And we had somebody who was called, I've forgotten the name, who used to say, ruling is good, but we know that this is not our time to rule. It does not belong to us.
So very briefly, Dr. Nechitsaulu, let me ask you, because as I say, you're opening a can of worms in a way. If this kingship, queendom, should not be with the Mpepu Ramabulana family, which family should it be then, if we were to follow your line of argument? Which family was stripped of this kingship?
Nepawe. This is for Nepawe, Shiria Denga.
All right.
Mapungubwe.
Okay, I'll come back to that.
Mapungubwe is one of the oldest, what is that, kingdom?
Yes.
If ever you can check.
All
but
right.
these ones, they're just coming from nowhere. And now they're claiming to be king and queens.
All right, I'll come back to that. I'll give you an opportunity to say a bit more about that. But I want to bring back Bond and Nyoka into this conversation. Bond, so we've talked about the issue of male primogeniture, the preference of a boy or a man in terms of issues of inheritance in the Bear case, in terms of the issues of ascendance to a throne in the Shilubana case. And then there's that provision of the Constitution that the Constitutional Court cited in the Shilubana case. Tell me, how difficult is it, a conversation for traditional communities, not just what we are seeing among the Venda, but generally across the country, for them to reconcile the practices and traditions they've long held? Some of them are patriarchal in nature or were interpreted to be patriarchal by those who are doing the interpreting, reconcile them with our values of the Constitution?
Okay, thank you very much. I think the practice of culture should be a process. People have to be convinced that these are different compartments. The struggle that we waged was for non-racialism and for equality. If, therefore, there's another obstacle called gender inequality, it calls for a struggle or a conviction. People must be convinced that there should be gender equality just as much as we fought for racial equality. Those are two sides of the same coin. And also be reminded further that Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states quite clearly for everyone to understand, whether they practice culture or not, that every human being is born free and equal in rights and dignity, unquote. So as soon as you're born, there's no question of the fact that you must be put in a different category now because you're born a girl, or in a different category you're a boy. Everyone is equal. We share the same equality. If this is going to be the next phase of the struggle, so be it. People must be convinced that a girl or a woman is equal to a boy or a woman. We share the same organs. The difference is that, and the blood is still the same that flows. The only difference, sorry.
Sure, go ahead, Bond, we still have you.
No, sorry, the only difference is that the sex is different. The earthquake cannot come just because of a different sex.
Yeah.
So I'm sure people understand where we come from. Decades and centuries of division. It should not be a strange match to convince them that we can have a female queen as head of that tribe. We have lived through Queen Elizabeth being the colonial master or mistress of South Africa from 1910. So it should not be a difficult thing. If we embrace the fact that we are free now, let's embrace that freedom in all respects, including that of gender inequality or gender equality. Thank you.
Okay, Bond, I've got to thank you for that. Thank you for those insights. As you are talking, it actually occurs to me that a possible conversation would be for us to go back to the Baloyi people, right, who were at the center of that Shilubana case, and exactly the points that Bond is raising. Dr. Nechitsauru, just a parting shot to you before I go to the break. This family that you mentioned, that you're saying should be the rightful line and lineage of succession as opposed to the Mpepu Ramaburana, do they have any interest? Are they following? Are they part of the proceedings? What's their status at the moment? And how many people among the Venda recognize what you are saying, that that should have been the right lineage as opposed to this one you are challenging?
I think we are talking about 86% of the Venda because they are the Vangonas. But I'm just surprised if ever this person is emphasizing the British, the common law in South Africa. We are not British, we are Africans, and we have to be judged according to our custom. What is taking place in Britain is not what is supposed to take place in Venda.
Yeah.
Because we are the Venda.
Gotcha.
In amongst the Venda, we have the families of chieftainships, which are led by women because of their rituals. When they perform their rituals, they discover that this lady is supposed to be a chief. I'm not talking about the British law, the common law.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about this law. That's why I'm saying we are politicizing our customs.
Dr. Nechi Tsauru, I have to leave it there. For this afternoon. Thank you for joining us. That's Dr. Ntambeleni Nechi Tsauru, a customary law as well as culture and tradition commentator from the University of Venda. And of course, earlier on, we were joined by Bond Nyoka, an attorney and legal analyst. As you can see, the conversation very much alive. Stay with us. We have more for you coming up in a moment. Hey, welcome back. Let's turn to issues of education now and the interlinkage between education and human rights. The Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Kwahube, says the remaining pit latrines at schools that are yet to be done away with could completely be removed by June this year. Kwahube was visiting schools in Limpopo's Venda district to monitor progress in constructing safe latrines. The president's SAFE program, Sanitation Appropriate for Education, identified over 3,000 schools that needed safe toilets by the 31st of March this year.
Today, we only have 141 of those toilets identified. So this is an achievement, ladies and gentlemen, but it is not victory. I'm well aware that the 2018 data for the SAFE initiative may not be complete, and therefore we may not account for all pit toilets in the country. There may be still pit toilets that exist and some schools which were not part of the audit. And that is why I'm saying this is but the beginning. Ours was to make sure that the identified backlog has been eradicated, and we are well on our way in doing so, but we are not saying that this is but the end.
So let's stay with that story then. Amnesty International South Africa has expressed disappointment over the Department of Basic Education's failure to eliminate all pit toilets in schools by the self-imposed by the department itself, and the deadline was March 31, 2025. Executive Director Shanila Mohammed criticized the DBE for repeatedly missing deadlines since 2016, highlighting a pattern of broken promises and shifting goals. This ongoing issue is seen as a violation of human rights of thousands of learners. So let's speak now to Genevieve Quintal from Amnesty International South Africa, who joins us now to take that conversation forward. Good afternoon, Genevieve. Thank you for agreeing to come and join me. Let's work on a Saturday afternoon. You and I used to be colleagues many, many years ago, pounding the streets as reporters. Look at us now, grappling with issues of national and international importance. Jokes aside, Genevieve, the Minister of Basic Education recently giving an update and saying that 96% of the pit toilets identified in 2018 and that were put onto the SAFE program, Sanitation Appropriate for Education, 96% of those have been, eradicated. Is it any comfort over the fact that we are yet to achieve the complete eradication of pit latrines by the deadline that the department set itself?
Good afternoon, Tulas, and thank you so much for having me. It's great to be chatting to you about this. We are extremely disappointed, and I want to take us back to the first time the issue of pit toilets really came up. In 2013, plain pit toilets were banned from all South African schools by the minimum uniform norms and standards for public school infrastructure, and they had to be removed and replaced by 2016. We are now in 2025, and we still haven't been able to remove those pit toilets. As the minister said, in 2018, an audit was done, and because they weren't able to hit the deadline already in 2016, an audit was done to see which schools were still using pit toilets, and that's when they put together schools to form part of the SAFE initiative that you spoke about. And then again, we missed deadlines. The next deadline was 2020. Then we pushed a further deadline, 2022. Then there was a February 2023 deadline. Then there was a 2024 deadline. And then we had this 31st of March 2025, or end of the financial year deadline. And we're still only at 96% to us. And I'm sorry, that's not good enough. This is something that's been happening. This has been a target for more than a decade. And as you said, and in the clip you played, it's not even all this. We're not even sure that these are all the schools in South Africa that are still using pit toilets. There still needs to be a further audit to see whether there are other schools. And there are plenty of other schools, from what we're hearing, that still have pit toilets. So we really need clear timelines. We need clarity from the Education Department. We cannot continue to see our children using these illegal pit toilets in schools.
So the Basic Education Minister, Siviwe Kwagube, I suppose the way I read it, it's not another deadline that she's imposing, but it is her reckoning with the issue and saying that looking at where and how far we've come, talking about 141 pit toilets. I'm not sure if it's pit toilets or schools with pit toilets. This could be eradicated by June this year. Are you comforted?
No. First, it's 141 schools, and so good point. I mean, a school could be sitting with 3 pit toilets. And I get the minister has only been in this position for almost a year. But it's not the minister that goes around fixing pit toilets. It's the Departments of Basic Education through whatever contracts they are giving out. There are contracts, etc. I know she has spoken about issues of contractors, but this is a failure of the whole Department of Basic Education. And whether it's Minister Siviwe or whether it was the former minister or whoever, the fact of the matter is the DBE has still got to run no matter who the minister is. And the fact of the matter is that DBE has failed. It's failed to miss a deadline. And actually, this is another deadline. Now we're saying, oh, well, give us till July to sort out the other 141 schools. But then we still need to do an audit to find where the other pit toilets are. And this is unacceptable to us. This is more than a decade since they were made illegal. And also we are now into going into 31 years of democracy in this country. We're still talking about children using pit toilets in schools. And we talk about education being this future of our country and the youth being the future of our country, and we're not providing them with a safe environment to learn in.
And Genevieve, when you look at the problem itself, do you have an understanding and perhaps an appreciation of what the difficulties are? Just from my own reading, we are told that in some contexts, it's simply impossible to have water-based toilet solutions. So there's been a lot of these ventilated pits, the so-called VIP toilets that are being introduced in those contexts. How complex does geography, location, and infrastructure, the differing levels of infrastructure development across the country, how complex does that make the picture?
I'm sure it makes it extremely complex. And we're not saying, we're talking about plain pit toilets, literally just a hole in the ground. There are schools still using a hole in the ground. I guess it's another debate. The VIP pit toilets are apparently made safer. It's got the ventilation, etc. So I get that. But then why are we also building schools in areas where we're not able to get water? I guess that's a whole other conversation to us when it comes to infrastructure. Again, I think we've been having an infrastructure conversation around so many sectors in this country and issues with infrastructure. We can look at water, we can look at so many other issues. We have an issue when it comes to infrastructure. But the fact of the matter is, we've been sitting with this problem for how many years? Like I said, more than a decade. Surely we should be further than I know there are complications. And we talk about plain pit toilets, the hole in the floor, where we have seen just in the last couple of years, 2-3 children literally die in feces. Surely more can be done. Surely. And then who's accountable for that? Whoever is messing up somewhere along the line, wherever it is, whether it's with contracts, etc., then people need to be held accountable if they're not doing their jobs.
And earlier on, you alluded, Genevieve, to the norms and standards, right? And I think that's an important area to start. And it's 2025. I know it was adopted many, many years ago, but I think it's important to bring it back to the fore and focus the norms and standards. Why is that document and that policy important? The way I understand it, it was the government of South Africa defining what a school is and what a school isn't, only for it to go ahead and violate that very definition that it put down?
Absolutely, Tulas. I think that sometimes this is the story of where we are as a country. We have such great policies, actually, and really great legislation. We have this amazing world-class constitution, and yet we have a problem with implementation. I mean, and I think the minimum norms and standards was, I know DBE, what was it, 2-3 years ago, tried to amend it a bit, and there was a bit of uproar because they were actually trying to remove a bit of the issues around the deadlines of toilets. I'd have to be honest, go back and look at that. But absolutely, here we have policy that tells you what is needed, what can be a school, what can't be a school, what's infrastructure. This is all about infrastructure, what infrastructure schools need. A policy put in place in 2013. And in 2025, the very same government who put this policy into place, and again, government's supposed to continue running no matter who's in a department, no matter who's leading politically. Our government departments are supposed to continue working, and everyone should be following this policy. So why are we not following policy that's been put in place to ensure that children are learning in a safe environment? And that's the question government actually has to answer for us.
All right, I've got to thank you, and thank you for posing that question. Hopefully we get the answers. That's Genevieve Quintal of Amnesty International South Africa there. Stay with us in the next few minutes. You hear it all the time. So, Africa is a continent that is quite youthful, has a youth bulge in its population, alive with possibility, creativity, and startups, the potential for startups. But it would seem it's not that simple. So we'll have a conversation that brings startups on the African continent into sharp focus. Welcome back. This is Week in Review on SABC News. As African startups continue to shape the continent's economic future, many are looking beyond borders for growth opportunities. But what drives this trend, and how are governments and organizations responding to support these innovators? Sandile Hlangani compiled this insert.
There are two paths. One is explaining how we have created a business environment in Estonia that's conducive to startups, to doing business. That's our e-government system. So 100% of services, government services, are online. We have a single digital identity, unique, that all of your transactions from registering at school, getting a loan, to paying your taxes, all are done with the same identity and with a digital signature. So the amount of time that you save from not having to go into queues, making easy payments, lets you focus on your business. So we're sharing these experiences with the government, with the different ministries, and looking to see which areas they would be interested of understanding from our experience, or even sharing technologies. The other path is, as I mentioned, the actual players. So we put founders together with founders. The VC, the venture capitalists come and explain how they're looking at funding. But we also had a pitching competition at the Latitude 59 event in Kenya. And the winner is coming in May to the Latitude 59 event in Estonia. But also some awards are mentoring and for example, legal hours, because you need all of these different aspects to be covered. So it's really bringing these people together with real experts. And as we speak, we have 10 startups from 7 African countries in Pretoria at a session, helping them learn how to pitch. There's a session on financial management. There's all of these sessions that give them the tools to go get the funding. And they will be coming to Estonia as well in May.
All right, let's take that conversation forward. I'm joined now by McKevin Ayaba, a renowned startup ecosystems architect and investment readiness expert. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me, McKevin. So before we even talk about this trend of African startups establishing themselves elsewhere, just explain to someone who's watching, when we talk about African startups, what are we talking about here, and what is the trend on the African continent, and importantly, in South Africa with the dynamics we have of unemployment?
I think we need to be very honest. I think Africa is doing so well when it comes to innovation and the startup ecosystem in Africa is really growing. I mean, of course, if we're not really growing in 2021, we will not have received our $4.9 billion US into the startup ecosystem. So yes, Africa startups have changed. I mean, looking at 10 years down the line, we have so many startups that have really done some well in the continent. Look like Flutterway in Nigeria, look like Andela in Nigeria. These are all startups that are unicorns. You know, we wouldn't. I mean, who would have thought that Africa is having more than 9-10 unicorns in Africa in the last? We're looking at the last 5-10 years. So we are really doing great. Of course, we have some challenges, which I think that's something that we need to start embracing, like the power of AI that is coming over right now. We need to start embracing new technology to be able to stay brave. I mean, to be able to stay on a competitive edge. I mean, before you spoke to me, I heard you somebody talking about Estonia. These are some of the challenges that African startups face with a lot of government, a lot of bureaucracy, and lack of really policies. But I think some government are really doing some great work. For instance, what we were talking about Estonia, about the e-residency. I think what he meant there was the e-residency for startups, which gives them opportunity for every startup to go to Estonia and establish.
Yeah. So it's important to take everyone along in the conversation, McKevin. So I'm going to rewind you just a little bit. You talk about 9 to 10 unicorns on the African continent. I think I've got a fair idea of what you're talking about, but just explain for everyone's benefit what you're talking about there and why that is significant.
No, we talk about unicorns. We talk about startups that have raised over $1 billion. You know, in Africa, that's what we meant by a unicorn. Yeah. So you can see, so we already have that. I mean, like I said, who would have thought? We talk about fintech. We talk about in the financial sector. So for anyone who don't understand what that means, it just means that we have startups that have been able to raise over $1 billion. That's what unicorn actually means.
Sure. Then let's get to the heart of our conversation then, McKevin. This trend of African startups looking to establish a foothold elsewhere, usually outside of the continent, is that a benefit of the e-residence that you were talking about just now, borderlessness and the likes, or does it talk to particular challenges on the African continent? In other words, is it more of the push factors or the pull factors that are driving this?
It's both. It's both the pull and the push. I mean, let's look at. Let's look for instance, you have about 3.75 million graduates that come out of the colleges, and with an annually, and you have only about 300 to 450 suitable for formal jobs, right? So it's only fair that they start looking at opportunities like what Estonia is providing the e-residence. So which means that it gives startups need to start looking at global expansion and looking beyond Africa. You know, we also have struggle with market. You know, with that amount of graduates, it shows that we struggle with customers. So they need to start looking at access to bigger bases. For instance, if we take an example, like Jumia. Jumia, for instance, is strategically operating across multiple countries to broaden the customer reach. I mentioned earlier on about Andela that works across, that supports startups, but they also work across multiple countries. So the best way to look at, we still have a smaller market, even though our solutions solve global problems. So we need to start looking at how do we scale beyond just our various, for instance, South Africa or Africa, and look and beyond.
Yeah. So the other side of this, the flip side of this coin, McKevin, is funding for startups and the issue of venture capitalists, venture capital comes into that conversation, but also the attitude of startups themselves, right? The willingness to embrace different models of funding and accepting that you're not always going to be the majority shareholder. There might be that instance where you need to be open to other people coming in. Talk to me about those factors. To what extent are we as Africans understanding those conversations, and the venture capital market, how ripe is it on the continent?
Honestly, we struggle. It's one of the biggest challenges that most African startups struggle with. We call it, in other words, we call it investment readiness, whereas a lot of startups are not investment ready. Some of them don't speak the language that you are talking about because they don't understand. It's an educational aspect of it. That's why I heard earlier on before I came in, you were talking about pitching, startup pitches, but they need to be ready to be able to pitch. They need to be able to convince investor. I know that that's one of the most difficult things that we face in Africa, where most startups would say, we don't get investment. The key questions that we always ask them, somebody like us at our organization set up a startup, which we mentor so many startups, we always ask them, but what are you offering? You will hear some ridiculous amount of what startups say that they are worth. Some startup will be telling that they are looking for $1 million, and you're seeing that they don't even have, their business is not even worth that amount. Yeah. So most startups don't even understand their business. They don't even understand what investors are looking at. They don't even know the various types of investors. Some don't even know the difference between a VC and an angel investor or an impact investor. So it requires us to look back, to accept that we are still in that space, we are still in the learning space. And honestly, we must be honest that when the word startup is something that just becomes just new 10, 15 years within in Africa, whereas the rest of the world, like Europe and the US, have been using this word for more than 40, 50 years, the word startup, right? Yeah. So we still need to learn. We are still in that learning scale, but we need to also put in the work. I understand what investors are looking for. Yeah. Know very well, know what your business is, know about your target market.
I'm smiling, McKevin, because as you are talking, I'm just, I had scenes of, you remember that old reality TV, Shark Tank, I think it was called. I'm already thinking about those conversations when the sharks would be there. McKevin, just very lastly, just looking into the future, you mentioned AI, but I want to add to that the shakeups that are happening in the global economy. What opportunities will these developments, trends bring for African startups that we should look out for and seize? Just as a parting shot.
To be honest, in the next 5-10 years, digitalization would drive AI and blockchain adoption, especially in the fintech and the agri-tech space for sustainability trends. Especially looking at the green energy solution, which is something that a lot of investors are beginning to look into. So my advice would be that we should really start. We can't run away from technology. We need to start embracing technology. Look, for instance, when we had COVID. When COVID came, the only thing that we had to use was Zoom. Look like things like Teams that become grown over time. So African startups must really embrace technology, the latest technology that are coming. That are out there.
I've got to leave it there. Thank you for your time and thank you for indulging me. That's McKevin Ayaba there, a renowned startup ecosystems architect and investment readiness expert. Stay with us. In the next few minutes, we'll look back at the key developments in sport, right? That's where our passions lie. So let's see what has happened on the field of play and off it. And that's coming up shortly. Let's return to our question to you that we were posing throughout the show. The High Court in Gqeberha delivering a verdict that stunned the nation. The Nigerian televangelist Timothy Omotosho and his co-accused were found not guilty on 32 charges. And the question we asked was, do you still trust the justice system, particularly in addressing and attending to gender-based violence? So those are, let's show you the results coming through. All right. Right. I don't believe we're able to do that just yet, but we will certainly try and bring that conversation back for you and show you some of those comments. That's it from me for today. The week ahead for this Saturday afternoon. The week ahead, rather, is coming to you tomorrow at 12 noon. So do join me for that. SA Today continues with news at the top of the hour. So from myself and the rest of the Week in Review team, thank you for watching. Take care.